10 years after its inaugural summit in Dubrovnik, the Three Seas initiative is back in Croatia. This political and economic platform was launched in 2015 by the then presidents of Croatia and Poland, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović and Andrzej Duda, and gathers 13 participating states between the Adriatic, the Black and the Baltic Sea. Here to discuss the initiative's work, security considerations and transatlantic cooperation, I'm pleased to be joined by Croatia's former president, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović. Madam President, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
At this year's summit, we witnessed Poland inviting the members or proposing to the members to represent the Three Seas at the upcoming G20 summit. What can Warsaw's participation at the G20 bring to the Three Seas?
Well, that is great news to me because it really testifies that we have become a strong agent, and that agency and confidence of Central Europe that we are aware of our problems, that we have a vision to solve them, and that we know how to solve them, was one of the goals of the initiative itself. And the President of Poland, representing the whole space of Central Europe in between the Three Seas at the G20 summit, I believe will be an excellent thing because it will further attract attention and hopefully investment to the space of Central Europe. And I'm also particularly pleased that the US President and the US administration who have supported the initiative since the very beginning will also be directly involved.
We're also witnessing an increased interest in the Three Seas initiative. Italy just joined as a strategic partner. What would you say, what motivates this interest in the Three Seas at this particular moment in time?
The Three Seas area is an area of opportunity. The growth rate is double that of the European Union, so there are so many opportunities. And even though we need to keep coherence of the initiative and focus on the Central European space, nevertheless, we cannot achieve the projects that we want to finance and implement without outside investment, assistance, and connectivity that goes not just across the region, but that also strengthens the European Union from within and that connects us to different parts of the world.
The overarching topic of this year's Three Seas summit is energy security. What can the Three Seas do with respect to energy security? Could you provide some examples?
Yes, well, energy security was precisely the first pillar that we discussed, President Duda and myself, when I visited with him in Krakow. So we started these discussions and we expressed this concern about the dependence of our space on a single or just very few sources of energy and energy routes. And even though at the time the geopolitical situation was not as complex as today, we did have that position that energy security equals security. And then we looked at the other differences that still exist in between the so-called East and the West of Europe. We wanted to erase the physical and the mental differences and to build connectivity from north to south. Back at the time, Croatia did not have an LNG terminal. And in the meantime, of course, because of the war in Ukraine and nowadays because of the crisis in the Middle East, it just demonstrates the fact that we do have to diversify energy from renewables going even to nuclear for those countries who want to, of course, provided that it is safe. And I think that working together and complementing each other and then building interconnections among us so that we can assist each other if need be is a very important aspect of the security of the whole of Central Europe, which in my opinion is the backbone of European security.
I would like also to talk about U.S. as a partner to the initiative, as a strategic partner to the initiative. In 2017, we saw the presence of U.S. President Donald Trump. This year, 2026, the American delegation was represented by Energy Secretary Chris Wright. And I think it seems that U.S. is particularly involved in energy projects. You mentioned the LNG terminal in Croatia. We see some participation there as well. We witnessed the signing of an agreement with Bosnia and Herzegovina now connecting to Croatia's gas network and to the said LNG terminal. Could you tell us more about this particular agreement, as well as the U.S. involvement in the energy cooperation and the overall cooperation of 3 Seas?
Yes, I'm happy that we enjoyed the support from the United States from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, when we organized the exploratory meeting in 2015 in New York, we did it with the assistance of the U.S. Atlantic Council. And ever since, they've been really closely involved, especially with the business forum and the energy and business dimension. And I was also very pleasantly surprised when I approached President Trump during his first term in office on the margins of a NATO summit, and I invited him to Warsaw, to the next summit of the 3 Seas Initiative, and I briefly explained what the initiative was all about. And to my surprise, he said yes immediately. So he joined us. It was a very constructive meeting. The 3 Seas does enjoy bipartisan support, so both the Republican and the Democratic side of the aisle, and I'm very happy about that. And I think that the U.S. realizes the importance of energy security and security in general in Central Europe when it comes to the stability of the transatlantic relationship. What I said this morning, I will repeat that. We don't want to be a region in between great powers or in between different regions. We want to be a consolidated, self-confident, ambitious region that is an active contributor to security and coherence and development of the European Union from within, but also building these connections with the partner countries and with the participating countries. So we have a few of those, and hopefully one day Bosnia and Herzegovina will also be an associated participating country. And I think that this interconnection is very important, because precisely providing for different energy flows, not being dependent on one single source, and being able to have the energy flow go in both directions or in multiple directions, and to be able in that way to assist also Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the gists of the initiative. So obviously we are connected to our neighborhood, and we will continue to build those connections.
As I understand, one of the priorities of the Croatian presidency is expanding the 3 Seas initiative further, going to other regions. Could you tell us what that would look like, and what would those regions have from the initiative, and vice versa?
I believe that the membership will remain of the countries of the European Union, because that has been sort of our standard from the very beginning. It makes it easier because it provides a certain image of the region, of stability that goes with the European Union, of stability of investment, protection, etc. Nevertheless, of course, we're not isolated. We very much, our security depends on our neighbor's security, including Ukraine, for instance. So we're going to be looking into the future, where I cannot predict what the membership will look like. It really is up to the initiative and the leaders to take future decisions. But we will certainly see more of these associated partners or specific trans-border projects, so project by project work. However, those connections, I am completely certain, will be increasing.
In this year's declaration, we saw a mention of the EU enlargement, this being a cornerstone of security,
yes,
of peace, of stability. Croatia was among the last countries to join the European Union. In your view, what is the future of EU enlargement?
Well, so far we were the last country to have joined back in 2013, so it's been 13 years now. I believe that enlargement is one of the most successful European policies. It really extends the area of freedom, security, and stability. I support Ukraine as a candidate, but one of my concerns is also our own neighborhood of the Western Balkans, and I really would like to see a lot more progress in terms of the European Union paying a bit more attention to the Western Balkans, honoring our commitments, and rewarding specific projects with specific steps towards membership of the European Union. In my opinion, that is the key to lasting peace, stability, and prosperity of our neighborhood.
We already touched upon the topic of security, but I would like to touch upon a very specific perspective of Croatia reintroducing mandatory military service. What prompted this decision?
Well, Croatia is not the only country who has done that. It's the new geopolitical situation. And I have to tell you, quite honestly, as someone who has been through NATO pre-deployment service, pre-deployment training, that it comes in very useful in life. Because in life you can have all sorts of emergencies. Of course, we're not wishing for a war, we're not expecting a war, but we have to be prepared for the war. However, I think it's good for young people to learn some structure, to learn the basics of protecting themselves and everybody else around them, how to react in emergency situations, perhaps how to handle weapons as well if need be, and how to be able to help others with the first aid, etc. We were the generation who actually had that in school. Different classes in elementary, elementary and especially in high school. And again, I found it very useful as when you find, I'll just give you an example of earthquake in Zagreb, for instance. So the moment that I heard the rumble, I was awakened by it, and I kind of sensed that it was an earthquake, and then rushed to my son's bedroom to take him out of bed and throwing under a bearing wall, because you have to know how to react in an emergency situation. So for me, that military service is about learning those important life skills, but also about camaraderie, about how to be part of a team and work together. And I think that it's quite important for new young generations, as I see that a lot of them are spending time individually and are connecting with others in cyberspace, but they really have to connect in actual space as well.
Staying on the topic of security, in the recent weeks we heard US President Donald Trump saying that the United States might be leaving the NATO alliance. You, as you mentioned, you have experience in NATO, you've held a high-level position. Do you think that we can anticipate something like this? And also, do you think that European allies are ready for the absence of US, but also for its decreased presence in the alliance?
Well, in today's geopolitical circumstances, it's difficult to anticipate anything. But I am a truly committed transatlanticist, and I hope and I do believe that the United States will never leave NATO, that we will continue to strengthen the transatlantic relationship in spite of any disagreements. I do agree to a certain degree with President Trump, because he had said it before. He had said it during his first term in office. And it wasn't just him, it was President Obama as well. And it's the fact that we ourselves had committed to, at the time, devoting 2% of the GDP for defense. And just a few countries were living up to the obligations that we ourselves have undertaken. And yes, we do have to be responsible for our own future. We cannot outsource security. We have to build the right infrastructure. But I would also say that we need to work together with the United States in order not to duplicate, but to be able to combine our forces. So for the European Union, the European pillar, to be strengthened, and to build the necessary infrastructure and invest a lot more in our own security, because it's investment in our own future. However, to continue working with the United States, I would never give up on that. I think that we have to talk to the last breath.
Among the criticism that came from Donald Trump was also, part of it was directed to the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, to its war efforts in Iran, and the reluctance of European allies to join that. Do you think that European allies were right to be reserved in this situation? What do you think is the way forward?
It's a sovereign decision of every country, even in the context of NATO. When NATO takes decision by consensus, which means that you don't have to have unanimous agreement, but no one can disagree. Even in those situations, you can opt out from the implementation of a certain decision. And I think it's a very smart way to go when it comes to NATO, because then it allows that no individual country can block the decision. But really, this is a matter for discussion between individual countries, with President Trump and with the United States, about potential engagement.
My last question is on your...
No, just to add, I'm really hoping for peace in the Middle East, and I hope that we are talking about a peace process and not military engagement in the future.
my last question regarding your career in particular. You were the first female president of Croatia. You also held a high-level position within NATO. You have a career that is very impressive, I think, objectively.
Thank you.
And as a woman myself, I cannot imagine that it came without challenges. So I imagine there were some challenges. What were the challenges that you experienced as a woman in diplomacy and politics, and how did you deal with them?
Yes, there still are quite a few challenges, I must say. It's not always about pushing glass ceilings, not always going up. It's sometimes about navigating glass labyrinths when you horizontally want to move in any position where you are. I think that unfortunately women are still not taken as seriously as men when it comes to the pool of talented people for any positions. When I was president, I walked the talk and I appointed 50% of my advisors women to those positions. And unfortunately, the question that, or the comment that I would hear a lot in the Croatian public was, you have too many women around you. You know, what do you mean? It's only half of the advisors reflecting half of our society. However, we still have prejudices, and then women tend to behave like men or dress like men. I think that we have to keep our femininity, and that we have to teach everyone that we're all different. In the way that we look, in the way that we speak, in the way that perhaps we communicate or even work, but that we should all be judged on the merit of what we have done. Now, seriously, looking at that, not looking at the form, but looking at the substance as well. And I also think it's very important for women to support each other, because sometimes, from my experience, some women were the ones who proved to be more of an obstacle than men. And then finally, of course, we have to involve men in the whole discussion, because they still hold power in most institutions in most countries. And without their goodwill and the changes that they implement, we can open the space for talented women.
Well, I, for one, am happy that you walked the talk, as I think this is the only way towards gender equality.
I agree, yes.
Madam President, thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for watching TVP World. I'm Sonja Bišćan, and I invite you to stay tuned for more news coverage.